Hey everyone, my name is Gunther, and welcome back to Sakura Zoo, which I feel like for the first time since this series has started, we can officially say that now that we have our own working entrance for the zoo. Today, it's going to be a little different. We're going to focus a little bit on the building. We're also going to focus on checking in on all of our animals that we've added in the previous episodes. But to start, we're going to focus on creating the main hub for our entrance. There's going to be a total of 4 buildings, and we're working on the first one, which is going to be duplicated right next to it. For me, I really wanted to focus on this self-serve style counter where guests can come up, buy their own tickets, and then move forward into the rest of the zoo. So super easy, made a quick 1x3 building, and then added in these alcoves. I really like the idea of adding in these alcoves because it gives us the opportunity to hide some of these entrance buildings. In this case, the ATM is going to act as our self-serve kiosk, and then also add a little bit of detailing to make it pop a little bit more than what we would normally see. In fact, this added alcove adds so much more dimension to the build, which is kind of nice. Now, keep in mind that we actually have 4 walls that we have to worry about on this particular build, because all of our guests are going to see the back, and that's going to come up later in the episode. I took a lot of inspiration for this particular build from Ueno Zoo's entrance, specifically one of their side entrances, but I really loved how it worked out, and if you've been there, you might notice the same inspiration here. In fact, when you see the roof come into play, I think you'll really start to notice where a lot of that inspiration came in. But I will be the first person to admit, sometimes you'll build something and it just doesn't work out. It's no different with this particular build as well, so just keep in mind that you're going to see some pieces that pop up that really don't make sense to the actual build, and so we'll be removing them later. But before we get into the rest of this particular build, I think now is the perfect time for us to take a stop and go and check in on our Binturons. So I'm really excited to say hello again to Salt, Caramel, and Baby Toffee, who at this point is not so much a baby anymore. I really love this particular shot because you can see the surrounding area being built up, which I think really brings the rest of this build together. On top of that, you can't go wrong with some lovely binturongs and some guests just enjoying their stay in Sakura Zoo. Getting back to the build itself, it's time to focus on what I like to think is probably going to be one of the more iconic features of this particular build, which is actually the roof. And I realize we place a roof, this is going to be more of this pop-out roof that we're going to have. It's going to stand on top of our 2 buildings. I'm going to start off with some conservation board pieces, the curved ones specifically, and I'll rotate them around quite a bit, and I'm going to get this really smooth looking curved piece that's going to have a lot of dimension and waves to it. Now I realize that can't really work with it the way it is because the waves don't really work very well with the rest of the building pieces, so we're going to create a little bit of a border with some more of these Asian wood pieces. Now I am placing different sizes. This is really just to kind of get a very smooth look all the way across, and at the end of the day, it actually worked out really well, which you can't go wrong. When your builds start to come together, it's even better. On top of that, I'm going to utilize these emissive windows. I really like how these worked. I've never used them before, which is really interesting, and it's going to add as the rain guard for the rest of this build, because nobody wants to be under these roofs and have rain coming down on them. Now, I was having a conversation with Blob in our Discord community, and we were kind of talking about the fact that there's a lot of pieces within Planet Zoo that we just don't use. And the emissive window piece is a perfect example of that. I've never used them before, but they are so versatile. I've seen people utilizing them to create fake puddles. I've seen people use them to make mirrors, and it's a fantastic piece. On that note, one of the pieces I did just recently discover, which actually comes from the Zookeeper pack, so I guess I kind of get a pass on this, are these metal poles which acted as the perfect anchor piece to hold the roof onto the building itself. Now I realize with our buildings kind of set up, we have 4 of them all put together, it's time for us to focus a little bit more on the entrance. It looks pretty bland, so we're going to try a few different techniques here to kind of guide everything in together. Right off the bat, we're going to use some terraforming, create some little ridges. It's going to do perfect as sightline blocks, and we're also going to add in some of these tree blocks. I really like the idea of having respect for nature within our zoo, specifically around what I like to think of our grandfather trees. So these are trees that have been around for so long that to cut them down to create a pad of concrete would be such a shame. So to that end, we have 4 grandfather trees. I'm going to try a few different ones. I was going to go with some cherry blossom trees because they're the perfect namesake, but I ended up going with Himalayan birch trees if I'm not mistaken. Kind of like the idea of these windswept trees in this open area. I think it really fits with the rest of the theme of the zoo. Now going back to our ridges or our hills that we've created, It's one thing to create hills, but I'm going to try a different technique as well to continue that sightline, but also add to the idea that this is a realistic zoo. We don't really want our guests foraging over this hill and into the zoo proper, so what we're going to do is we're going to place some barrier walls and then some foliage. The barrier walls act as a great way to kind of direct our guests to where we want, and truthfully, we don't want any of our guests to stand out in this entrance and kind of look into some of our habitats that we may or may not place in behind this barrier wall. So we're already having this issue with our Pallas cat habitat. We really want to avoid it in our entrance. Now from a foliage perspective, we have two areas that we're working on. We have this more natural hill, and then we also have this mulch flat bed. The mulch flat bed is to help hide some of that terraforming, but also gives it a more anchored point of view within this entrance. From a foliage perspective, we're utilizing a lot of wild hedgerow, common saltwort, hawthorn bushes, rose bushes, beech trees, black poplar trees, cherry blossom trees, bracken, and crowberry bushes. In fact, we've actually had a lot of foliage make it into this area, maybe a little bit more than what I intended. Originally, I wanted this mulch area to be a little bit more man-made, but I kind of like the idea of this overgrown, more natural-looking foliage block. Now, while this is happening, we are going to take a quick peek in our Pallas cat habitat. In fact, I actually have a confession to make. I originally asked for some name ideas, and I totally missed two of my favorite names. So we're going to make a little bit of a retcon. We are now calling our Pallas cats Garfield and Lulu, which I absolutely love, and a huge shout out to Anna Kate Howell 9852 for this amazing name idea. Thank you so much, and I really absolutely love how this habitat turned out. Returning back to the build, we have graduated from making all the buildings to detailing all the buildings. And the first detail that you're going to see today is going to be adding the name to our zoo. Sakura Zoo is a fantastic name, but we need a font to match it. So thank you to Sparrow for sharing this amazing blueprint. You're going to see a link in the description below if you also want to utilize this blueprint. I also encourage you to go and leave a like on this blueprint because I absolutely love what they've done with this. You may actually see this pop up a few times within the zoo. I have a few ideas on how we can work this font in, but I'm really excited to see how it all turns out. Now, I mentioned that we're on the detailing phase, but you might have noticed there's two additional buildings that you didn't really see pop up. On the left is what I like to think we have as our administration building. We also have two info kiosks that I've placed in here. These act as a great way for guests to come and talk to somebody in person. Maybe they want to purchase their tickets as opposed to going through the self-serve kiosks, or maybe they even want to pick up a stroller or something like that. On top of that, they can pick up memberships and everything that would come included with an info kiosk. I've also added in some rest areas for our staff. Because we're building in franchise mode, we need to make sure that we have ample room for staff rest areas, as well as other staff amenities. It's super important that we always keep staff amenities in mind. Because we're building in franchise mode, rest areas is going to be the one thing that might hurt us the most in getting our staff to the areas we want them to come in. So stay tuned for a future management episode where we focus purely on making sure that our zoo is actually managed well. Now for the building on the right, kind of saw this come together. We placed some windows and some doors, and it's just a shell at this stage. But it's not always going to be a shell. For me, I'm really focusing on making every building an explorable building. We want something to be there on the inside to be as realistic as possible. So to that end, we're going to be turning this eventually into a gift shop. I think this will be the perfect place for us to have a gift shop, or at least our first gift shop within Sakura Zoo. Now getting back to the detailing phase, we're going to do something that I've never done before. And it's kind of weird because you've seen me do this. We've done these wires and these AC units a dozen times. But I really wanted to add a little bit more life and appearance to this particular build. So to that end, I'm going to add in a little trail of dirt. I like to think that our staff are super overworked right now. It's a small zoo. We don't really have a lot of funds. We're investing everything that we have into building new things for our zoos to draw in more guests. It's that game, it's that consumerism aspect of it. So that means that our maintenance staff are really overworked, and they really don't have time to bother with a lonely AC unit that's sprung a leak. I used some grunge rotated just so we can see the edge to get that really dirty line, so it's a stain of water that's gone down, and then some moss at the bottom to imply some dirty puddle of water. I thought this worked really well, and it's these small details that really make the rest of this zoo pop. Speaking of popping, I think now is the perfect time to visit our final animal, the pangolin. And a huge shout out to OX3102 for the amazing name suggestions, Twig and Branch. And you've also provided an idea of how they've come to the zoo. And I think this is perfect. Both Twig and Branch were rescued from an exotic food market in Southeast Asia, and I think this speaks to the idea that Chinese pangolins are highly endangered, and partially this is due to that exotic food network. So with our trip around the zoo complete, it is time for us to focus on the last portion of this particular build. And really, that's all about adding a pop of color to our entrance plaza. It's a really large pad of concrete and there's not a lot going on in here. I don't want to have anything that's going to impede guest traffic, so we're going to focus on creating these circles that are going to add a pop of texture and color to the entire build. Now, I'm not going to take credit for this idea. This actually came from Simply Zoological, and she was helping me to come up with some ideas that we could utilize, and I thought this one was the best way to go about it. Now, the first circle you saw was super easy. We took some circular pieces, rotated it, and got a very complete full circle. But I wanted to take it a step further. So I found this really cool design, imported it into the game, placed it on a screen, and then just copied it with some shapes. And we ended up with this really cool design. Now, initially, it looked pretty cool, but it was also really small, and learning my lesson from our last video, adding more is sometimes not the best way to go, and you're going to see me add in a bunch of these circles. I'm going to copy them everywhere before I realized that maybe we just went a little too heavy on this. So after lots of trial and error, went through, removed a lot of the circles, kind of spread them out a little bit more, and also adjusted the colors. Originally, I was going to go with a lot of different kind of shades of blue, purples, pinks, and stuff like that, before I realized the name Sakura Zoo implied that the zoo is the Cherry Blossom Zoo. And when you think of cherry blossoms, you're going to think of shades of pink, and that's what we're going to do. So all these circles are different varying shades of pink, and I think it really kind of landed together to make a really interesting looking plaza for our zoo. The last thing we have to do is tie in the left-hand side of this particular build, which is really just adding even more foliage. We talked a little bit about this earlier in the build, so I'm not going to bore you with the details. Now, you might have noticed some of these weird banners that you see popping up from time to time. You are going to get a better view of these in the ending cinematics, but these are ways to welcome our guests into the zoo and highlight all of the animals that we have. I'm really excited to show off the final build here. Now, speaking of the final build, we are pretty much at the end of this speed build as well. So I want to say a few things. If you like the build or the episode, or maybe had some fun visiting our binturongs, Pallas cats, and Chinese pangolins, think about tapping that like button. This lets me know I'm doing a good job, and hopefully I've also earned your subscription today. But I want you to remember, as always, there's no pressure to do so. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much for all of your support, ideas, and feedback that you've provided so far. You've all really helped to shape Sakura Zoo with your input. Now, as you're watching these ending cinematics, I really want you to pay attention because you might see an Easter egg for our next habitat, which is already complete and ready to go. Otherwise, again, I just want to say thank you so much for your support, and as always, ciao for now.